Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another of our guest artist streams. We have Sarah Ellis here from the Royal Shakespeare Company, who's the director of. I can't read my own writing; it's so small. um, it, you you
It's
want to?
digital development.
There you go.
It doesn't
I'm
work.
so sorry, Sarah. I've got a tiny, tiny screen where you guys are of a preview of what's going out to the screen, and your role is so big that it's so small on my screen. um, we also have Sean and Daniel as always. Um, and thank you, Sarah, for coming. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's lovely to see you all on little squares on Zoom. It's lovely to connect with you. It's great to see you all.
I'll be curious at the end of all of this. At the beginning, I've been working remote for 20 years, one way and another. So I don't even notice it. But I remember at the start, everyone was like, oh, it's so exhausting. And I wonder if people are just more used to it. Do you find, well, of course, you did a lot of this even before COVID, right? Plus planes. Because I remember every
Yeah.
time I would talk to you, it'd be, I'm in Johannesburg. I'm in Timbuktu. So, uh,
Yeah, for me, it's just without the jet lag at the moment. So,
yeah, so
so, so that's okay.
the,
And yeah, I think we've been working like this for quite some time. Maybe not all of our time, but certainly most of the time.
so just to set it up for people, tell us briefly what it is that your role is at the RSC. So we have a context for the rest of the conversation, and then we'll sort of jump in and
Sure.
start playing.
So I'm director of development at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it's the first role the company has had dedicated in this area, and it's primarily to look at artistic partnerships and initiatives for the company that extend the theatre making toolkit and allow us to imagine and reimagine ourselves as theatre practitioners, as storytellers, and how we engage with audiences. Um, Theatre has always had a relationship with technology, whether that's the printing press, whether that's electricity, whether that's candlelight, and now whether that's these new digital tools and technologies that allow us to think beyond potentially our physical spaces. And so my job has been to connect people together and to welcome different collaborators to the company and Stratford upon Avon, and for us to explore Shakespeare's work and also work of new writers in new ways of making theatre.
So that's very nicely put, and I think it's theater. The point that theater, along with stage magic, has always actually there's always been a cadre of people using whatever the latest tech is, from gaslight to wire work to whatever is out there, people use to try to make stories and to make them in a way that feels fresh. And I think it's worth remembering that it's nice to contextualize what you're doing is what they were doing in 1900 is what they were doing in 1750. I've got an idea for a trap door. Check this out. Um, uh, and that, uh, Don Giovanni will sink through the stage. It'll be awesome. So
That's right.
in that context, you did not start as a digital person or as a relationship person, right? You started on the creative producing, making shows, and yeah.
That's right, yeah. So always work with artists. So the thing that basically fundamentally inspires me is working with creatives, and how I found my way into the relationship side or the digital side was excited what those things could do to support creatives effectively. So what could we do that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do ourselves? So But for me, to work with a writer or a performer or anyone that has a creative idea that they want to put out there in the world is what motivates me. And I genuinely think if you can put these technologies that we're seeing emerging coming through what I'd call industry or society, if you put those in the hands of artists, truly amazing things can happen. And that's really where the focus has gone for me now.
So I've got a certain background. I've got, like you in a funny way, a different journey, but I have one foot in sort of art with a, as my wife puts it, a capital R. And another sort of in the tech side. And one of the things that I've noticed is generally change comes from small, nimble people on the edge trying to find an edge who are interested in exploration. It's very rare to find a legacy player who is moving things forward. I'm really interested about why the RSC started doing this, because usually people don't until they have to. But you guys have had, at least to my knowledge, a 10-year run, if not more, of quite aggressively exploring this kind of tool set and these kinds of relationships. And it's a little unusual for me. Like, it's what I expect to see in the Punchdrunks of the world, you know, or someone who came up in the early 2000s and got interested in whatever. But you've got a flagship cultural organization that pre-COVID was already succeeding in a classic manner. So what is it about this organization that made it curious about this stuff?
I think the company's always innovated, and I think that artists and theatre practitioners have always innovated. So it's actually in our DNA. And so it would be a really, really natural progression for us to explore digital tech as it's emerging. So we look at it through a lens of curiosity to begin with, and then start researching, developing it, and then seeing what is useful to us when making theatre. But I think sometimes we perceive what I would call a cultural brand, such as the Royal Shakespeare Company or an institution, as something that looks back. But actually, when we work, where we work brilliantly is we work for now and we look at the future. And I suppose that our playwright in residence is over 400 years old, but those plays have existed over time because they have been innovated at the time and spoken to the generation of audiences that were receiving them at that time. And so we have that cultural memory in us, and also that rigor of that. But I think at the heart of what we do is always around, what do these plays say now, and within that, how do we connect now? And so in a way, you may approach it differently to a sort of more younger, agile company, and that's great because that provides a diversity around it, and that's what you want. So what you've got to always do is look at what's the promise of what your company is putting out there. So our promise is about these stories, these promises about our promises to our audiences, that we will connect with them meaningfully around these texts and any writer that we work with an authenticity. But it would take us away if we didn't recognize the new technologies that are coming into play, but we respect it alongside the really huge portfolio of craft that we have within the company. And I think that sets us in a different place. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm about the RSC contributing to the ecosystem of culture. And I'm also aware of what it can do and how it can support the system of the arts and theatre as well, and look at the next generation coming through. And I believe that a lot of the work we've been doing at the RSC is getting ourselves fit for purpose, experimenting in spaces to learn from that, take that to traditional forms of theatre making, find those meeting points, create those cultures of inclusivity and collaboration. So when we see a new generation of theatre practitioner coming through, whether that's the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we've created those conditions for that community to thrive. So if you're coming out of theatre school now, if you're coming off a process of university or study, I hope that our company speaks to you, and in a myriad of ways, but also when we look at what skills we need to make our work in the future, I have no doubt it will include coders and programmers and people coming from different skill sets that we want to welcome into making theatre. And that takes time. That actually, the people angle and the cultural aspect takes a lot of time. But because you're working with a company that's been going longer, then you can look at that pendulum swing of innovation in a much longer term way. So it's just different, but I think they all complement each other.
Something you said that really struck me in there, I'm going to say it back to you to make sure I haven't messed it up, but the fact is there are, I think it's 37 Shakespeare plays.
So.
And you got to do them all, and there won't be any more. There's not a new one coming. So
not that we know about at the moment.
Right. It would be a major discovery. Ethel the pirate's daughter unearthed at last. The fact that such a fundamental part of your repertoire is 400 years old is a spur in some senses to the technological development, because you're always having to make that new, and to make it fit the times.
I lost you for a minute. Say that again.
1 second. I'm going to wait till you unfreeze. There we go. So what I was saying is,
yeah.
One thing I heard was, because you're doing the same repertoire, because you're going to make The Winter's Tale every 5 or 10 years, it actually is a driver to investigate new technologies, because the challenge is always make The Winter's Tale speak to today. Whereas if I'm in a small company somewhere, I'm making new work, just the content of the day fills up a lot of the space for innovation, the topic. Whereas you're in a place where you're going to make The Winter's Tale. So how do we make it new? How do we make it connect?
Yeah, and that can happen in multiple ways. It can happen in how you look at a specific narrative thread of the play and focus on a way you want to a lens that you want the audience to see that play. So it happens in multiple ways. But I think from my perspective, what I want to make sure is that the creative teams that we have at the RSC have access and knowledge and a community that can deliver the play how they want it to be delivered in the best possible way. And so you don't see the technology and the artistry as that separate. And I think that's quite important, is that when we stop calling it a technology and it becomes a tool, for example, is a really interesting thing to me about when we stop calling it a technology, because that's when it's assimilated into our everyday in a non-other way. And that's quite interesting to me. And
that's
I think
a super interesting idea. Do you have an example of something that in your career has made that transition from technology to tool?
Gosh,
because I think
I can
I'm
think
old
about it
enough
in long. Yeah,
sorry, you go.
I think email probably in a really crass way is that we don't think about email as it is
100%.
our modern day form of letter writing. and we just do it really, really naturally now without any thought.
I mean, you and I come from the before times when there weren't cell phones. Well, maybe you don't. I certainly do.
No, I do.
So I was talking to these guys, and one of the things that happens in our show is that there's a moment at which the audience needs to call one of the characters on the phone and convince him to do a thing or not. And the way you express an Australian phone number is that now, you were told, is put +61 in front of it. Well, a lot of people don't know, and I'm one of them, that if you hold down the 0 on your smart key, it eventually turns into a plus, and then it's doing something with area codes. And I was perplexed and peevish, as I often am when faced with, the present, let alone the future. And I think I was in a meeting with these guys when we were figuring that out, or maybe it was with my family, and I said, well, what if you're like dialing a rotary phone? There's no plus on that. And then there was just a gale of astonished laughter, as if I'd said, well, what if you have a candlestick phone? How does this work with your signaling lantern? I
mean,
so
I guess back then you weren't making overseas calls either.
you could actually.
Not so much.
But to be fair,
my son.
Oh, sorry. To be fair, Sean was quite complex dealing with our 8-number digit phone numbers versus their 6-number phone numbers, let alone the +61 that had to go on top of that made it 10.
Very complicated. My son, when he was younger, in a holiday home we were staying at, they had a VHS machine, so a video machine, and they didn't realise you had to rewind it after you finished it. They thought they'd broken it.
Last old person story, and then I'll move on. I had a friend who was going to university, and as everybody knows, in every school, there's a lot of legacy stuff because you can only buy equipment so often. And they had monitors, and they went to the lab, and she was a returning student, so she was older than the rest of her classmates. And her classmates were absolutely bewildered because they could not make their monitors come on. The monitors had a little dial on them, and no matter how many times they pushed the dial, it wouldn't come on. And she finally turned on and said, "You turn it like a knob." And they were like, "I've never seen this. What would a television with a dial be like? What even is that?" Another thing I will say, not just about two points, one quick because it's about writing, and then another that's slightly slower. I've done a lot of work in which you change something about the formal way the story is delivered. It's in texts, it's over payphones, it's on websites, it's you know the stuff I've done well enough to understand what I'm saying. So as a rule of thumb, the more novel your route of administration is for a work of art, for a story, the more important it is that the audience already knows the story, because they need to be able to fill it in even when the usual delivery mechanic isn't there. So there's a reason that Sleep No More claims that it is Macbeth. It's a claim that I don't know how supportable it is, but it really helps an audience navigate this very unfamiliar experience. And they're moving, Sleep No More is a great example, right? Because you're moving non-linearly through a space. It's not how you experience theater normally. So it's important to have a text that is Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, or something that people know well enough that you can mess with it. In some senses, the more innovative you are in delivering a story, the simpler and more recognizable and more known that story should be. in my experience. One of the questions that I
No,
wanted
I
to
agree,
ask, go
yeah.
ahead. No.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. You need your cultural reference points if you're going to shift how you want audiences to behave, and not make assumptions that they will go with you unless they have a roots, and that can be. Anyway, yeah, I agree.
Is there something in the theater that you can remember being a novel technology that's just part of the toolkit now?
I remember, so when we did the Tempest back in 2016, which was a collaboration with Intel, and we put a real-time avatar on stage made in game engine, projected through 30 projectors on stage. And there was a lovely moment where we were doing the get-in tech rehearsal. And it wasn't me, but there was a woman from, I think, Wigs and Makeup, and she sat there and she went, I remember when I saw my first gobo, my first lighting state in that way. And it was joyful because she had the same joy then that she had then. And they were just watching the tech. And I thought that was wonderful. And I think that for me, that felt, that you have this, for every first that you do on a stage, there's like 100 firsts backstage. And there's such a team of people with such duty of care to make that play happen, that are all invested in the sense of collaboration. No one person makes a piece of theatre. It hasn't got a single sense of authorship. It comes together. It's one of the most collaborative art forms there is. So when you listen to things like that, that's where you see people see the fit right as well, if you know what I mean, that you're not just parachuting a technology into a really, really sophisticated form of craft, that it makes sense and it's seen as something that makes what they do more possible. So yeah, that would be my example.
Yeah, that's a great one. The point you make, so John Keats famously called Shakespeare the writer in all of history with the greatest negative capability. And what he meant by negative capability is the ability to imagine what it's like to be someone you are not. Said Shakespeare more completely than any other writer himself disappears and is able to imagine what it is to be such a huge cast of characters. And I think that that's true. I think one of the hallmarks of Shakespeare's work is that it's hard to find Shakespeare there. He's good, other than the method is very Shakespeare, but the people are so various. And I think that one of the things that we lose consistently is the memory that there's a reason for that. It's theater. You're making it every day with 10 or 12 other people, and you're talking all the time. So I'm sure Shakespeare gets a lot of credit for ideas that were like Jack Kemp. Oh, I have this aunt who does this funny thing. She has this habit of, and you end up at the nurse from Romeo and Juliet. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Novelists, those of us who came into the world after the sort of romantic ideal of artist as hero and, your soul journey to express your special snowflakeness, often miss that Shakespeare is working in a time and in a form that was tremendously collaborative. There just were other people helping make it in a way that's not true if you're a novelist.
I think that's right. And it was moving really quickly. So they were putting those scripts out really, really quickly. They were writing really ferociously. They were hungry with what, that was coming into their world effectively from the greater world, if you know what I mean, in terms of that context. So they were really hungry to show that. But people often talk about Shakespeare and his ability to connect with the human condition. And I think that that's why those plays have sort of continued to resonate with us in society. You look at Romeo and Juliet, and that is a that's a long running soap opera. Boy Meets Girl, Families Divided. That is something that you can understand and appreciate. Characters in those plays, I'm sure, are drawn from people that Shakespeare met, either in Stratford or in London, where he was writing. If you look at Hamlet and the pain of and seeking, the loss of your father and finding out who killed him, and that journey with that, and who he becomes through that, and what gets lost, and the tragedies within that. And if you look at the history plays, they're about power, they're about human fragility around wanting power, and then when you have it, keeping hold of it. There are ways that you connect with those plays, and I think you're absolutely right. That human condition angle is super important. And I do think with technology, if we look at the ethics around technology, if we look at the use of technology and who has technology and who doesn't have it, I think it very quickly becomes a human question. And I think that those two things pair up really, really well, and that often we look at diversity within the technology that we work in too. We look at shared experience. We won't just look at a technology for technology's sake. We will think about, how democratic is this technology? All of that angle is important too. So it's not that. That's what I mean. You sort of, I suppose, what Shakespeare's allowed us with our company is a huge repository of ideas and possibilities, and that is a gift for us to go quite deep with some of the thoughts that we have around our own experimentation, and how we may look at motion capture, for example, as a form of puppetry. It comes from us looking at character and wanting to experiment with character, not as a solution to, not as a technological solution to something.
So let's talk a little bit about that Tempest, or if you like, pick another example. But I'm curious, when you said, so we made this thing in partnership with Intel, how does that happen? Like what take us to the degree that it's possible to how you put something like that together, or how it comes together.
Sean, you go on the internet of an evening and you start browsing and seeing what people are up to, and then you see a YouTube clip from the Consumer Electronics Summit in Vegas, and you go, oh, that's interesting, what are they doing? And then you realize it's Intel's CEO demonstrating some of their technology, and then you don't know anyone at Intel, so you just drop them their customer service line so that you like their video, and a couple of weeks later they get back to you. So I wish I could say it's hard-nosed strategy, but it's often speculation and chutzpah that gets you that. But I'm absolutely no illusion of the privilege I have around the brand that I work for and what that says.
I'm just saying, if you have to be cold calling from Shakespeare is a good, like, that it helps open a door, I'm sure. But
it does.
At another level, I think it's inspiring if you're, yes, it helps. Of course it helps. This is the Royal Shakespeare Company calling. Totally get it. I can remember being at Magic Leap and people saying, oh, we're doing something with the RSC. And like, who do I have to kill to get that job? So it helps. But having said that, I think it's also inspiring for Bensley and Daniel to know, okay, well, how they do it at the RSC is they see something cool and they write a note to the person. And it is surprising, I will say, how effective that is. I wrote a letter to an author once. They had written a book that I really liked. And I wanted to say, good job, mate. That had to be hard to do. And the letter was to John le Carré. And John le Carré wrote me back that day. it is surprising sometimes how game recognizes game. And if you see someone doing something cool, and if you have a creative idea yourself of, I see that piece of tech, or I see that piece of music, or I see that, we had Steve Boyle on earlier, who's a friend of mine who does a lot of immersive theater. And he often starts with a space. Like someone says, oh, we happen to have this building that's standing empty at this time that we might be able to do something in. And Steve will go into the building and say, okay, looking at this space, you know what we could do that would be really cool here? And then he goes and contacts the people who own the space and says, let me tell you about something really neat we could do with a whole bunch of actors and your venue, and let's make a show. And it is surprising how often things start with that. If you see a piece of work online in a YouTube video, or you hear a jingle on the radio, or you see a physical space, and you call them up and say, that has inspired something in me. I think it works more often than people would realize to just try making that connection.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that for people like Thomas and Daniel, and also anyone that is looking to connect with, anyone right now, and even myself, like I'm still looking to connect with people I admire, that I don't know who they are. I don't think that changes in time. You don't build an address book or a repository of information. I'm still like a kid in a sweet shop when I see something awesome by someone. That doesn't go. And I think that's also something else to say, that hopefully that never changes, and hopefully that you always feel that. I do think there's something around, if you receive a gift from someone that says, I really loved what you did, don't forget, when anyone puts anything out in the world, they put it out in the world to connect with people, but there's very rarely a feedback loop for those makers, whether you're a writer or an artist or a practitioner, that is not now about hits or about numbers, but to make an effort to effectively write a letter to someone to say that you moved me or you inspired me. It's very hard to ignore that if you've made that.
It's so
quite
true.
Simple.
It's so often I hear some version of, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to bother them, or who am I? And I always say, dudes, we're in entertainment. For some reason, we made this bizarre and probably emotionally crippled bargain that we were going to devote our life's work to pleasing strangers that we will never meet. Trust me when I tell you, we will be excited to get your note that said, hi, I'm a stranger, you moved me. Like, there are people out there.
I genuinely, yeah. But we've been living in a broadcast world for such a long time. We've been living. That's a really important. It's a really important point, I think, for now, when we can have a dialogue within the work, or we can have a connection that is distributed, which is broken down in form potentially sometimes. We've been passive in lots of ways. In Shakespeare's time, it was much more interactive in the live environment. People were, it was an event, it was where you did business, it was where you flirted, it was where, politically, people were seen or not seen. There was interaction between the audience and the performers. We have evolved into this sort of quite sort of passive environment now. That's still immersed, and that's an important part. But what I'm saying is that the connection between the artist or the writer has potentially been broadcasting out, and I believe we have a new opportunity with the tools that we have and the platforms like this, or the platforms that we can be on where we can place theatre. We can have maybe a different type of dialogue with our audiences, and with distributed content, potentially sort of share that out a bit. Now that's kind of like you jumping off a diving board in some senses, in terms of the form, But I think we should be bold, and we should take risk, and we should have courage in that, because I do think the connection, we all want to know that our work connected, and often that has been sitting as a producer in the back of a theatre, or seeing how people come out of the theatre. Often that's looking at your social media thread at 10 o'clock at night, after people have come out from the show. But yeah, there's different ways you can do that.
So I don't know how much we've talked about how this particular show is built, but the core idea was, even before there was an idea for a play, there was an idea for a theater. And we wanted to put the play on Twitch or Facebook Live, a platform in which you have a video window, and next to the video window, a chat channel, and those two things talk to one another. Fundamental to Roundabout is the sense that that conversation in the audience is something we're aware of, that's part of the play, that is part of the fun. Even if you don't, say you never type a comment, or you never vote in a poll, or you never do any of this stuff, even so, what's happening over there is part of the entertainment for you, even as a completely passive observer. And one of the things I've resisted saying, but I have thought a lot, is that if you have ever been in a streaming service, if you've ever watched people live tweet the Oscars, or watched when they demoed the Star Wars thing on Fortnite, groundlings, right? We have this trope about Shakespeare and the groundlings, and the guy is up front and the hurly-burly of it. You look at that Fortnite piece for Star Wars, that's theater with a lot of hurly-burly. Like, the audience is right in there, they're jumping up and down, they're doing things, they're expressing themselves, and it's in real time. It's not waiting for the review in the paper the next day, and it's not even waiting till they post something on Insta later that night. It's right now, during the show, expressing themselves, dancing, talking, heckling, whatever it is they're bringing. That energy is really there and vital. And that's why we built this play that way, is so that real-time audience engagement can be heard by the performers, and the audience can see the performers hearing them. And so we're trying to tighten that loop up.
Yeah. And I think that's just joyful for me to hear, because you being part of that theatre community, you being part of that community that are pioneering that and kind of redefining togetherness and liveness, is something that I absolutely applaud, but also sort of, champion from where I sit. To see that happening is wondrous and joyful to me, because I absolutely agree, Sean. I think there's something around, particularly the time we're in now, and obviously Sean, we've been working together for some time and researching and developing what the future of live performance looks like before pandemic and now coming out of pandemic. But I think that the voice coming out of pandemic is the smaller, what I would call agile companies or collectives that can move quickly and swiftly to reassemble what togetherness and liveness is right now. And I think, we work part of an ecosystem around what theatre is about. And for me, what you're putting out there is what theatre's about. What I'm curious about is where that takes you next as well, and how you make it, and where that feedback loop around what you've created, what evolves from that. And I'm very curious about how that affects how you would look at the writing of it and the presentation of it and taking that forward. I feel like we're in a very, very big R&D stage of what live performance is about over the next few years. And this experimentation will, as I say, when you look at the theatre practitioner in school at the moment, the future theatre practitioner in school at the moment, this work will speak to people that may not have thought theatre was for them. And that's exciting to me, because that builds our community, and that makes the work more interesting. So yeah, I think that we're all doing the same thing in the context of where we're at.
I also think I agree with what you say. And I also think that, so I love the classic theater experience, just as I love reading a book. I'm also 100% sure that if Will and Richard were around today, they would 100% be thinking, like, an example is the second act of Antony and Cleopatra is broadcast television. We take you now live to Cairo, where what's the scene on the ground back in Thessaly? Like, there are, what is it, 21, 23 scenes, and it's absolutely the format of reporters from around the world calling in to talk about, you know, the Roman campaigns in Egypt and what's happening back in the Senate. Like, if Shakespeare and Dick Burbage and Jack Kemp and the rest of them were alive today, they would 100% be saying, what can we do with, you know, there's a lot of people playing Animal Crossing. We got to get in there somehow. We got to make a thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I think when we talk about this work, we're not talking about it at the expense of reading a book or watching a traditional play. Actually, I get great joy from watching a one-person show. I get great joy from a novel that takes me away and takes me somewhere else on my own. That they are things that I enjoy, and I don't think that you stop enjoying that. And I think you're absolutely right. But I think that artists are very drawn to doing, and by doing, experimenting and playing and looking at extending what they do. So extending the sort of what I would call ideation world of what they have. And I think that is part of the creative process, and that also flexes the creative muscle. So, you know, I don't think that this work happens at the cost of anything else. I think it just extends its elasticity. And I think that as a creative, you can sit in all different areas. It's not an exclusive, and Sean, you do that brilliantly. And I think it's not an exclusive type as well, and you don't homogenize the work that you make. But I think that's when we're most vulnerable, is when we think that this work is taking over existing forms of entertainment or forms of theatre. I think where we're at our best is when we talk to each other and build on that and recognize that. And you have to, my job has been about creating those safe spaces to do that.
Right.
And sometimes that's not always about the work, and that's about the culture and the community, and, as I say, the foundational principles in which we will enable people to work. So again, I'll go back to, for every first you do artistically, there will have been 100 firsts behind that no one saw. And I do champion that quiet innovator.
One of the things that I think is a marker of this age, when you talk about where does this go next, the age of social media, leaving aside the brand names, here I don't necessarily mean Facebook or Insta or Snap or Twitter, but rather taken all of them together, the fundamental difference about this age of the world is how many behaviors are taken collectively. And by collectively, I don't mean in the process of like we all vote and then we decide a winner, but my personal shorthand, so don't imagine this is a term of art from some other discipline. I think of them as shoaling behaviors. The way that people in the world today move like a school of fish or a flock of birds, where they are individuals, but they are also individuals in a networked community. And that moving flock is an audience of itself. One of the things that's important about alternate reality games is that they're designed not to be played by the flock, by the shoal. And I think what you're going to see is theater designed for the shoal. It will speak to individuals, but it will also acknowledge that those individuals are moving in this collective form. And so one of the things, you know, just the simple thing of involving the chat channel on Twitch for Roundabout is an example of acknowledging my audience is moving as a shoal, and they will enjoy being that flock of birds, that school of fish that moves through our play. And I think one of the things you're going to see about theater work is that it's going to more and more understand that sort of distributed collective nature of the audience. Apropos of nothing.
I think you're right.
I had a sort of strange ringside seat to the transition from we are all atoms to we are connected atoms.
Yeah, we are. We're way more. I mean, that is the fundamental shift for us. We are all connected now. It's easy. Well, under privileged circumstances, it's easy to connect. But I think in the context of distribution, we have a long way to go. I think content is there, the distribution mechanisms. It would be great to work with the distributors in order to create pathways for those shoals that's easier, if you know what I mean, and that allows a greater sense of artistic experimentation there. Many of the social media platforms are still broadcasters, just in what I would call sort of hyper, either hyper niche or hyper, like working very differently to what I would call, they're more agile broadcasters effectively. So I still think there's a bit of a way to go around distribution. But if us as artists and theatre practitioners can have an influence on that, which I believe we can, because we disrupt those spaces and we find the creativity within those spaces, I think that's super interesting. And that for me is a provocation to the next generation coming through. It's a bit like you've had 20 years worth of foundational work, 20 years probably of quite pioneering experimentation that put work out there that was probably before its time in some cases, by artists that probably knew its possibilities, and also work that probably has been put out there that with better platforms or infrastructures could have really, you know, audiences get it, audiences appreciate that. Don't ever lose sight of what those people have pioneered, because you are building on, not starting fresh. And with Shakespeare's work, I think he does that brilliantly. Those 400 years, you know, in every decade, the 1970s, if you go back to the 1940s or the 1920s, there are people that have moved things forward. And I think there's something really nice to recognize that in your work. And I think about our artistic director Greg, when he starts looking at a Shakespeare play, he will go back to the directors that have directed it before the RSC and be in conversation with them about why they made the choices that they made. And I think that's a beautiful ritual around it. And sometimes when we're in that tech space, we don't often think about that. And I would welcome that beat in our process.
From the point of view of, I think that's well said and quite lovely. Looking as I do, when I look at the screen, I see Bensley and Daniel there. And I ask the question, okay, for these guys, just getting out of theater school, what the hell am I going to do? What from your vantage point, best advice you've got as they're heading out into career and areas that feel, well, let's start with that. Best things for them to do would be what?
I think firstly, know that every person coming out of university's felt that. So I felt that when I came out of university, late 1990s. That is normal. Like, so just to sort of go, you're not alone in that. That's the bit. Then
So
I would
terror
say
is the natural condition.
Yeah, but I actually think that's okay. Like, work with that. Don't walk away from that. But I would say take every opportunity that you're given, and every opportunity you're given is a gift, and it's what you make of it. So that every CV that you send out is a gateway for a conversation. So it's a start of something. It's not the end of something. So think about that. But every conversation that you have, always look at it from what you could do with it, not what it can do for you, because it's about how you enter into that framework. And I would argue that every generation has brought challenges or brought opportunities, and keep an open mind to that. But don't always do what you think you should do. Do what you think about what's presented to you and how you can make that your own. And then always be part of a community, always be part of a network where you can find solidarity in where you're at the moment. But I think sometimes when people come out, you're in danger of a big come down from what you've experienced in your life, in your university or studying life. But I would say that's a reality, but it's not the end game. And play the long game. And if you feel that your work connects to a certain group, or if you feel that you have a strong sense of the identity of where you want to go, then be bold and take risk and have courage and speak to those that you feel you want to connect with. And if they're the right people, then they will welcome you in. And if they don't, then they weren't. And that's what I mean about the solidarity of it. But never sort of compromise what's integral to you, or never compromise artistically the values that you hold, because it will show in your work at a later point.
Well, that's beautifully said, and so true. And I think you're smart to include the sense of community, because it's a long old road, and parts of it are difficult. So you see me wearing my Numenorian sweatshirt. So the text for me is The Lord of the Rings. I read it when I was very small, and it affected me profoundly. So I could not be more on board with the sense that it is a long journey, and you will need a fellowship to complete it.
Keep your friends, and also celebrate your friends' successes alongside your own. They got to come to your opening nights, right? Like, that's important too.
And it's really easy.
I'll give you an example.
Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I'll just give you an example. So obviously it's a difficult time at the moment, and we were on track to do quite an amazing performance this year that cannot happen and cannot be. But one of the most important things that's come through it is the solidarity we've had with the people that we've worked with, and we've really kept that very strong. And whatever the work is going forward, everyone has put something into that, and that's what you really hold on to when you're in this industry, because it's vocational and that's what it's about. And I think that whatever part of your career you're in, you'll get brilliant successes and then challenges. And when you're faced with the challenges, a community are the best tonic for that. So I would really, really welcome that. And then, keep your imagination and do drop people letters, and I hope people will send you some when you've on this piece and others that you do in the future.
So well put. And of course, we are the living example, right? Like, we're not doing this play if I hadn't been working with you guys on that other play. It's not what I thought I would be doing this summer, but it wouldn't have happened without. So yeah. Getting ready to say yes a lot is a good idea. And the other thing you touched on about celebrating your friends' successes, particularly when you're in your 20s, early 30s, it's really, really easy to envy the people who seem to have it made, or who get a lucky break early, and to feel discouraged yourself. And it's hard, but an important discipline to instead celebrate that. It's hard to know, but to say a very old person thing, the wheel will come around. My mom, the first person who put this well was my mother, who said, I don't like 10-year high school reunions because at 10 years, there are winners and losers. At 25 years, everyone's done both. And it's all much more democratic by then because that time has gone by.
I also think creatively, like that is part of the process. Actually, it is what you learn through something that didn't work, sets you for. It's creatively, often it's a big sketchbook that you've got, and you come back to old ideas, and you come back to the things that you want to explore that weren't at the right time but are now. And like you say, it's play a long game, isn't it? It's not a quick win process. But every opportunity I've had has been given by someone somewhere, and you got to take it when you get it.
Do you guys have any questions, Bensley, Daniel? Before we let Sarah go, since we've kept her on the hook for a while.
It's been very interesting, especially the Intel part, because, well, I guess that broader, that higher end stuff, because obviously it feels quite out of reach for us at this stage, when we're, I guess Daniel and I are 21. We're considered babies, I guess, in the industry. And
you're doing all right.
And I guess how would you write a letter like that to Intel? So let's say we've already got our creative idea, and it's brilliant, and and we know Intel would be interested, but how would you approach that? And let's say we do already have the means of contacting them, but how do you bait the hook properly?
Sometimes an introduction helps if you're worried that your email won't get through, and people do. I mean, I write intros all the time for people that I care about and respect their work, so it's not it's not like a list of people I don't know, but it's a genuine
for 10
intro.
pounds, Sarah will
exactly. Yeah,
what's the going rate?
Do an intro, just a glass of wine. It's fine. I'm very cheap. But I think something you said there, I would just twist slightly. It's like, you've got your idea and it's brilliant. You've got to give space to anyone that you're writing to come in with you with what you want to do. And I think that, yes, you may have your idea and it's brilliant. If you want to them, it's not brilliant until they come in, because that's the psychology of it. So it's sort of like your intro is, what's the why? You know, what have you seen about them that they know why that you're reaching out to them, and that makes sense to them. In a way, the email is about more about them than it is about you, if that makes any sense. It's sort of like you can say something about you, but really, you think about the broadcasting. Think how many emails you get in your inbox that are telling you things, and then think when you're getting an email that's really considerately put together and not really, really long, but says, I think you're amazing and I'd love to share this idea with you.
Let's talk very quickly about that. I'm sorry I left this so late, but it's part of, this matches with another question I was going to ask, which is what for Intel, for Google, for Verizon, what is the value proposition of this relationship? Because the letter that says, hey, I've got this genius idea, would you supply money, is likely to land on deaf ears. Somehow they have to feel that they're partnered, there's something other than a supply of cash. Supply of cash might be involved, but there's got to be more for it, right? So what does an Intel or a Google or a Verizon, what for them is attractive about being involved in this kind of work?
It varies, and it depends what part of the business you're talking to. You've got to do your research. You really do. You know, you don't just write someone an email based. You know, I was being quite crass about, you know, I did watch a YouTube video clip, and I did do that. Then I researched the people I was talking, you know, emailing about. I knew who personally I wanted to connect with. I did a bit of research on them, but really value proposition varies. So it could be alignment with a younger voice. It could be alignment with a certain part of their community that helps them place their product in a different way. It could be you know, corporate social responsibility, them wanting to do some good within their company. It varies, but sometimes it's about the collaboration, and sometimes it's about the technologists seeing how a creative idea could help them experiment with their technology. And I think that some of the most interesting collaborations wrap themselves around that angle. And with that in mind, that you've really got to research what they do, what they're about, and how you can grasp the imagination of an engineer. And that's where you have to think about the language in which you're writing or talking, and to who you're talking to. I would say. Because if you wrap it around that, then the other bits fall in place.
Can I give you a really concrete example, Bensley?
Absolutely.
So you know that I had a startup called Fourth Wall Studios.
Yeah.
And a big part of the reason that I was at Magic Leap is that at Fourth Wall Studios, we were doing AR work, augmented reality work. This is back in 2000. We had a company that started out in 2008 and 2009. And in 2010, we met a guy who had patents, who had boatloads of cash, but he also had patents for a lot of machine vision. He had the machine vision patents that had come out of Mars rover project. And he was actually a doctor. And he had built a company who was doing research so that you could hold up your phone and scan a list of, like, hold up your phone and it would see the Cheerios box in the grocery store, and it would recognize that it was a Cheerios box, and the phone could say, this is a 10-ounce box of Cheerios, because he was building an application for the blind. And then there was a related tech where, you know, it could, having recognized the Cheerios box, it could like put things bigger on it. Say you were visually impaired. It could make the price very large or something like that. But underlying that was the sense, hey, this phone can see the world and I can add digital information to the world. And what we did is we basically came to him and said, this is an amazing technology that will make the world better for so many people. Have you ever considered using it to tell lies? Because we think there's a big application there. Because if instead of making a bigger Cheerios box, I put a leprechaun there, now we're making entertainment, which happens to be our world. But it's the same piece of tech. And long story short, the conversation that started with, you're building a thing that's super valuable in the world, and it's a really interesting technology, and it just so happens from over here in Entertainmentville, there's an application that you might not have thought of, but that is super compelling. So it does not usually go this way. But at the end of that conversation, we had $9 million to make a thing. And that's where, you know, the Emmy that is in my shelf came from. But it started in exactly the way that Sarah describes, in that there was a technologist who had a tool that they'd had an idea about or a use for, but we thought, oh, but you could also make theater out of that. And they were like, oh, that is cool. Let's try to figure out how to do that. So it's a good example of, it's not just, I'm going to put on a play, please write me a check. It's like, how can the arts, for better or worse, are not always great at generating money, but sometimes we generate heat. Sometimes we generate coolness. Sometimes we generate engagement or some sort of spark of life. And when you're like, the very first of these big alternate reality game projects we did for the Spielberg film AI was a collaboration with Microsoft. And people were, I kid you not, walking the halls of Microsoft saying, for the first time in history, we're cool. Right? It was 2001. It had just been 25 years or 20 years of people hating Microsoft for being, you know, a beige corporate raider. And suddenly they were doing something that was fun and cool and used some of their stuff, but deployed it in a new way. So that's part of finding the value proposition, is the engineers who are building these things are just as excited about what they're building as the playwright is who's writing a play. And if you can find a way to take their baby and give it a fun new clothes and a fun new role in life, that's a really good place to start.
I definitely think I definitely agree with that, with things that I've seen, that, you know, like viewers and things like that speaks. You know, if you've got a large viewing thing, obviously big companies like to get in on that. But if you've got a new sale point for them, a new kind of, you know, way to take that technology that they've never thought before or whatever, you know, they're interested. They want to be a part of innovation, because why would they have built the company in the first place if they didn't want to innovate? Kind of thing.
And sometimes, you know, you might not get Google ultimately to underwrite your project, but you might make a friend who works at Google in the course of that conversation, who 3 years later is doing an evolution of a piece of tech, and now you know that person. And just remembering that the tech people are theater people in the sense that they too are making projects that they care about, that they think are cool, and don't always know how to get the world to recognize this thing that they've made. Whether or not it works the first time or your first idea clicks, just knowing just as you and Daniel are 21 and coming out of theater school, there are 21-year-old engineers who are starting this week at Snapchat's a great one. Snap is has by far the largest AR portfolio in the world. Little known fact, popular Snap shows have audiences that are bigger than the audience for Game of Thrones. Nobody knows this, but I think it's 54% of Gen Y or Gen Z in America has watched a Snap original. I had no idea. So there are people, people just like you are starting this week over there, and they want to meet you, though they don't know it, just like you want to meet them but don't know it.
Yeah, build your community.
Yeah. Any last thoughts? Because everything else aside, I am on the hook to go make breakfast in a minute here. Dawn has come to Los Angeles.
Oh.
Well, I think Daniel, do you have anything you wanna say?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you for the advice. I think one of the main questions that I was going to inquire about is kind of that advice stepping out into the world, especially post pandemic. You know, everything is in a little bit of chaos, and we, you know, it's very daunting, but it's super exciting for us to be able to see all of those pieces that are floating around us, and you know, put a new combination into the cauldron as opposed to having to dig them up with a shovel first. So it does feel a little bit like that. Like we're in this like slow motion tableau where this media has struck the theater community, but also as a result, there are all these like treasures that have burst from the ground and are now floating in front of us to rearrange into something else. So no, thank you, Sean and Sarah, for the advice, especially for us coming into the industry.
You're part of the next stage, which is exciting. You are part of the next stage, which is just brilliant. So we're looking forward to having you.
Well, hopefully if all goes well this season and Sean doesn't give us a bad review in our roundtable, we'll be out by this year. It's all up to Sean, really, whether we get out this year or not. But thank you, Sarah.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Yeah.
It's been great having you here. Great talking to you. And thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us. Thank you, Sean and Daniel, as always, for joining us here. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for coming in. I know a lot of you are probably watching this from the future, because it is 11:20 p.m. where our main audience is, and we're all in tech at the moment, and we're all very, very, very sleepy. But yeah, so Roundabout opens August 4th, and I believe the rest of our show, productions start August 4th, and then we'll slowly open over that week. So check them out as well. And we'll have another special guest coming shortly. But until then, we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
And do it one more time for me.
Oh, I take my jumper off. It's not helping. Omega switch pat. Install. Whoa. I'm Sam.
Sam. Sam.
Whoa, dude, I'm in her yurt.
No. No, no, no.
I'm in her everything.
Good. This is art right here. The thing is, it's not no. It's not no. It's now.
Anyway, there were these people there watching us. And they were, watching the stream and talking about us.
No.
Are you sure they said that, or is that just something you wanted to get off your chest?
NAOU.
Okay, well, that's a bit rude.
No, oh hell! I'm packed!
That's pretty good, right?
That's the best thing I've ever seen you do, Lee.
That was great.
Anyway, there were these people there watching us. And they were, watching the stream and talking about us.
What did they say?
Oh, dude, just like